Hey all, got a new piece here that I'm going to show. I'm just going to run the time lapse here and talk a little bit as it goes. All right, so finished piece, and then we're going to see here is the drawing that it was based on, and then we're going to take it all the way back to the beginning. From that drawing, I projected that onto a toned surface and then just traced it out in paint to put down essentially the skeleton of what I'm going to build. And I'm going over top of it here in fairly thin washes, really just indicating some basic color and value notes for myself. I like to kind of start every piece with that, let that dry, and then that's a base for me to come on top of, which is what's happening here. So now I am still going over top of it, fairly thin and washy, just to kind of reestablish these colors and tones with some wet but very thin paint. And then I'm going to work further into that starting from focal points. And from here on out, everything that happens on this particular piece is single session wet on wet. But because I'm working so thin, the paint has some dryness it's wet and I can work on top of it and get a little bit of mixing and blending, but it's hard to describe this. It's really a feel thing that you get used to how wet you want it to be. When you're applying the paint, you put it down really thin and let it sit for a little bit of time. When you come back over top of it, you get just a little bit of mixing happening, but you can really kind of lay heavier strokes over top of that. If you come in really thick from the beginning, you're going to have a little bit more of a risk of things getting muddy or messy. Now, of course, everybody's got a different approach and temperament to how they want to work with the paint, but that's what works for me, is this thin building to thick. And when the paint is applied in that way, it lets me put down this kind of like mid-tone wash and then start building shadows and highlights on top of that. As long as I'm working in a relatively close value and color to what the final intention is going to be, I'm going to avoid that problem of muddiness that comes from starting out too heavy too fast, or changing your mind as you are working on it about if you want the value or the color to be something very different from what you've already started to put down. So a lot of that for me comes from just planning and preparing beforehand and then letting it build itself as I go. So talking a little bit about this particular commission, this was done for Matt Titilio for the Titilio Art Collective. And he wanted me to just do a piece that could be used as online promotion. He also was buying the original for his personal collection, and so this was a bit of a dual purpose there, but mostly focused on making this piece that could work well in, I guess you could say, logo form for web banners, for a variety of uses. This just figure on a white background that could be formatted in any number of different ways. And his branding for the collective, I believe, already had a theme of samurai, and that was what he asked for me to continue with this piece. Something that was in the direction of 16th century samurai. I'm not extremely knowledgeable about this particular topic. I did my best to research. I am always nervous doing historical illustration because I don't want to represent anything wrong or make any kind of blunders where you're taking something real from history and then turning it into a fantasy painting or anything like that. So I made my best effort to understand and depict realistic 16th century samurai armor here, and hopefully I'm at least halfway successful in doing that. The silhouette of the piece was really central and essential to the success of this piece because there's no background and because it's intended to be used in a different, like a number of different design contexts, or just to be flexible in how it can be used. But it still needs to have that impact and have some kind of eye-catching quality to it. And the person who I always think about and look to in situations where I'm asked to do something like that is J.C. Leyendecker, who really was the master of silhouette and the master of figures or vignettes on plain white backgrounds. I remember seeing a couple of Leyendecker paintings at, I think it was at the Dehesh Museum in New York, which I believe may not still be around anymore, and really just being taken with how strong his sense of design was and how he could really draw you in from across the room or from a great distance. I read somewhere he talked about when you're working that way, he'd do a lot of Saturday Evening Post covers, and they would be these plain, I believe often white, but definitely a lot of very flat color backgrounds with this interesting shape on the front, which had inside of it more interesting shapes. But it was just this general silhouette. And he talked about that you don't necessarily need for the silhouette to read immediately. You just need for it to be interesting and well designed. And then people get there, it catches your eye, and then you can figure out what's happening inside of it from there. In this particular case, just being a figure facing us like this, the silhouette is very easy to understand. And I think that is a helpful place to start. But I still worked a lot figuring out, really just playing around and tweaking and adjusting until I found something that felt what I was being asked to do here, which is to give the sense of this battle-ready posture. And I like the way that one sword is up, the other's down, and it kind of crosses in front of the sheath. You've got the flag, the Sashimoto, which has DAC for Datulo Art Collective, sticking up from the top. I think that overall, I'm just really happy with how that came out. And you can see at this point with all of the details finished in the piece, I'm going over all of the edges with just solid white and very carefully giving it an outline, which is going to help me control my edge transitions from figure to white background. And then once that white is in place, I'm then covering the rest of it. But I'm still using a relatively small brush here. And perhaps this is going to not show in reproduction. It'll just be flat white and you won't see any texture or brushstroke. But for me, the original is still important. And it is part of this commission as he's buying the original with the painting. And so having that texture of this white background, not just be flat white, but in person you would see that there is this interesting texture and quality to the way the white is applied that has just a little more interest to it than a flat, completely smooth background there. And then once that is in place, I think that I'm just watching. I think that I might go back and continue tweaking it a little bit, which you can't tell what I'm doing there, but I, in person, could see areas that didn't look quite right. And then I scratch my name with the back of a brush into the white paint there. And there we have it. There's the final piece. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.